Heyo, gamer with taste here. So this video is going to be a little bit different than the other videos because the other videos, for the most part, except for my first one, have been about gaming. So this one is going to be about time. I do have a philosophy degree. I don't know what that means. It just means that I've studied a bunch. I've studied philosophy. It doesn't necessarily make me like a prof. I mean, I'm not a professor. It's just a bachelor's degree, and it doesn't make me an expert. Um, but I do have a lot of philosophical thoughts, and I wanted to share one of those with you, and that is my philosophy on the existence of time. Specifically, why I believe time does not exist. Now, to preface this a little bit, I will say I haven't done an obscene amount of research. I have done some research. I've written a paper about it in college, and I did some research, but I'm not an expert on it by any means. And the research I've done is on philosophies of time, not necessarily the science behind it. I am very interested in science, so I've heard stuff, but just to preface, not an expert by any means. However, just wanted to share my thoughts on it. And to be completely honest, I believe that time doesn't exist. And it seems like more and more that makes it that makes the situation one where I'm preaching to the choir. A lot of other people kind of have the same outlook. It's getting less and less common for me to find someone who is surprised at the idea of, oh, time doesn't exist. Like most people seem to have the idea that no, time is just, it doesn't exist. But let's get into it. Let's get into why I believe it doesn't exist. So, the first reason, or the first thing that I would like to talk about is, what does it even mean for time to exist? Specifically, certain aspects of time, like when I was studying this topic, the philosophies of the existence of time, I found that there were people who believed that the past, present, and future all exist. And then there were people who believed that only the past and the present exist. And then there were people who believed that only the present exists. Now, I'm just a little bit confused at like, I can kind of understand thinking that the past, present, and future all exist simultaneously. There's a certain thought process that goes into that I can kind of wrap my head around. But once you start saying, oh, well, the past exists and the present exists, but the future doesn't, that's where I start getting confused. Because it's like, how is the existence of the past any different from the existence of the future? Like, I understand the past to be all of the events that have happened, right? So at one point or another, these events have happened. And if you're looking at it from the perspective of, well, Matt, you admit that all these events have happened, and the past is all the events that have happened. So clearly, the past exists. But my thing is like, sure, World War II happened, but World War II is not happening. Like it's not happening right now, right? So, does it exist? I mean, the USSR used to be a thing, and now, oh, wait, whatever. Russia used to be called something else. I'll think of a different example, but just because it happened in the past, like we nuked Hiroshima, right? That happened. But does the event of the United States dropping a nuclear bomb on Hiroshima exist? Does it exist? To me, that means that question implies the question of does it currently exist? Which implies the question of is it currently happening, right? Like in my head, for any time frame to possibly exist, it would have to be in the present. If it already happened, then it used to exist at some point, but it doesn't anymore. It's done. It's gone. It came and it went, and now it's not here, right? That's kind of the way my thought process works. Now it gets even more confusing if you start considering, well, why isn't there a philosophy of the present exists and the future exists, but the past doesn't? I think it's a little bit easier for people to understand why the future doesn't exist because these are all the events that haven't happened yet, right? But but here's the interesting thing. Just like how the past is the collection of all the events that have happened, and we know that though that set of events is a determined set of events, and the past cannot be changed, period. Like we know that we can't go back and change what has happened. We can't rewrite history. But here's the interesting thing: the future is the same sort of deal. You can't change the future. I'll give you a little thought experiment to show it. So let's say you have you go to a psychic and she tells you your future, right? And she says that tomorrow you're going to get hit by a bus and die. So what do you do? What do you do? Do you think, oh, it's just a psychic, I'm gonna go outside anyways? I got shopping to do. Well, I'm not gonna buy the milk because I went to a psychic. I just went there for the fuck of it, right? But do you do that or do you stay home and ensure that you don't get hit by a bus? Well, here's the thing. Let's say you stay home all day and you don't get hit by a bus. Did the psychic ever tell you your future? Because it didn't happen. And she said that it was happening the next day. Well, the next day it didn't happen. So did she tell you your future? No. No, she didn't. If it doesn't happen, then it was never going to be the future. The future is the set of events that will happen. You can't change the future. You can decide the future. There's a difference. There's a difference. The future doesn't change, but it is decided. So, just like the past is a collection of set events, the future is also a collection of set events. So, if that's kind of the way you decide that the future doesn't exist, but the past does, you're wrong in my head. In my head, you're just wrong. That's just not the way it works. The future is a set of uh, unchangeable events that we just don't know. We just don't know what they are. But they will happen. Otherwise, they wouldn't be the future. That's the way it works. So, my whole point with this initial topic is what the hell are we talking about with time existing? Does the past exist? Does the future exist? the fuck does that mean? What does that, why? Why are we talking about these things as if they exist? The future hasn't happened yet, and the past is dead and gone. What do you mean exist? The past exists now? The future exists now? Where are you, it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. The present could be said to exist, but there are a few things that I think get in the way of that. So, first of all, is it takes time for the human brain to process all the sensory input that we get, right? You may see something in front of you, but what you're seeing took time for your brain to register, right? It didn't happen instantaneously. It took 80 milliseconds, 30 milliseconds. I believe the number is close to around 80 milliseconds, which is much more of a lag than I thought it would be. But I think that was the number Google gave me, which, I mean, if you believe Google, if you trust Google, but that's what I've heard is 80 milliseconds for your brain to process any sensory input. So you're living about 80 milliseconds in the past at all times. You never actually experience the present. You experience what the present was 80 milliseconds ago. Now, I mean, 80 milliseconds, that's such a small buffer. And then you could argue, well, okay, Matt, but I mean, we still know what the present was 80 milliseconds ago. So the present still had to exist in order for us to sense it and to have that 80 millisecond lag on it, right? You could say that, and that wouldn't really be illogical to any degree. But I would also like to bring up the whole fact of like memory. I kind of have a feeling that memory is a huge, it plays a huge role in how we understand the passing of time. Because imagine if you were a goldfish and the only thing that you could, like, you could only remember from one side of the fishbowl to the other side of the fishbowl, right? What kind of sense of time is that? What is a goldfish's sense of time at that point? What kind of time does it perceive? I feel like if you only remember something that happened within a time span of like 10 seconds, like, I mean, you probably don't have a good grasp on your entire past, and therefore you probably don't have a good grasp on time itself. So I think that plays a role. And I also think that, you know, we are living things, us human beings. We are living things. We are born. We may not remember being born, but we see other people being born. We know that we were born and we die, right? And the closer we edge towards death, the higher chance we have of not really remembering anything all too well. But we have a beginning and we have an end. And in between all of that, there's a whole bunch of other things that we attribute with having a beginning and having an end. The movie begins and the movie will end, right? And you begin with the first page of a book and you end on the last page of a book. So once you've read the whole book, you know, the book is done, you know, complete. So this whole idea of something begins and then it ends, I feel like that is a big bias on anything that lives. I don't think it's a concept that's necessarily unique to humans, and I don't necessarily know how much it pervades throughout all of life. I don't know how intelligent you need to be to have that concept. Probably not too intelligent, but maybe a goldfish wouldn't be able to comprehend it, right? So there's that. I think that plays a role too. I think that's a sort of bias. But to get a little bit deeper into all of this, into why time doesn't exist, I would like to give you a thought experiment. That's quite a bit unrelated to what I've just got done talking about. So, this thought experiment that I have, let's say you have the whole universe in your hand. You have the entire universe. You are God, right? And you have the whole universe in your hand. And you have the power to remove anything you want from the universe. Well, okay. Let's start removing stuff. Let's remove all life. That's my cat. Let's start off by removing all life from the universe. If there's any aliens out there, they're gone too. They get removed. All life is just gone from the universe. Okay? Well, now let's remove matter. Matter and energy. E equals mc squared, I've been told, implies that energy and matter are equivalent. I've had some kickback whenever I brought it up. Whatever. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a physicist. Let's remove both matter and energy. Both of it. Right? All of it. Seems like a huge step. And it is. It is. It removes a lot of things from the universe, but let's remove all matter and all energy from the universe. So all of that is gone. What's left? What do we have left? I'm not really sure at this point. It seems like dark energy is not really real at this point from the articles I've been reading. It sounds like scientists are starting to believe that dark energy never really existed, and it didn't really seem like they found much proof that it existed anyways. But let's just say anything that could possibly be left over. Gravitational waves, probably a form of energy, but let's remove those two. Dark energy probably doesn't exist, but let's remove that too. Anything you can think of that could possibly exist that doesn't necessarily fall into um, matter or energy. But the big kicker is, like, after we remove everything we can from the universe, what do we have left? What's left? I mean, we have a space in which things can exist. We have a space in which we can put stuff back in, right? We have the plane of existence, perhaps. Now, would the plane of existence have to exist within another plane of existence? I don't know. I don't care. Let's remove it. That's gone too. The plane of existence is out. Now, what do we have left? Now, if you're going to say nothing, because that's what a lot of people would say. I don't know what you would say, but I mean, that's like kind of what I'm going for with this thought experiment. What do we have left? We've removed everything from the universe. What do we have left? The logical conclusion is to say nothing. We have nothing left. So, if that's true, if you answer with, oh, well, we have nothing left, then I would ask you, oh, well, what about time? I never said that we removed time. I said that we removed life, matter, energy, and I did say anything else that's left, but I was thinking more along the lines of anything other than time. It's hard to say. It's hard to have the twist in the thought experiment if I actually say remove everything except for time, because then by the end of it, the fact that I said anything except for time would probably make people say, oh, well, we have time left. There's time. We didn't remove it. But if you don't really bring it up And to be completely honest, it doesn't really matter if we brought it up, because then my follow up question would be, well, when did we remove time? If they said, oh, well, you said we removed everything that's left, and I thought that included time. Logical. Logical, I'll give it to them. That's fair. But then that raises questions on how they perceive time and why they think it is something that exists outside of matter and outside of energy. And I mean, some scientists would say, oh, well, you remove time once you remove the plane of existence. Because a lot of scientists would say that space and time are intertwined, right? Space time. That space doesn't actually exist. Time doesn't actually exist. Space time exists. That's kind of the way it works. Space and time are one and the same fabric. That's how people look at. That's how a lot of scientists will look at it. But my thing is that if there's nothing in that space time at all to distort it, then its natural state is going to, well, I would assume that its natural state would be to just be completely spread out all throughout the universe, all throughout the plane of existence. There's nothing distorting it. There's nothing there to distort it. I see no reason why it wouldn't just be in equilibrium all throughout, equally spread throughout, instead of, we have a big clump of space time over here. We have a big clump of time and space over here. But then we also have a void of time over here. There's nothing in the plane of existence to exert any sort of gravitational warping on the space to make this happen. There's no sort of energy or dark energy or exotic matter to do anything. But it's just like that. I don't really understand why it would be that way. Doesn't mean it wouldn't be. But the way I understand it is it would probably be a smooth distribution, completely equal all throughout, completely effectively distributed. And if time is the same everywhere and is eternal, like I mean, we have the plane of existence. The time is spread out evenly everywhere, right? So there's no relativity to it. There's no, you go over to here and time is different than if you go over to here. And then at the same time, what's going to destroy this universe? What's going to destroy the plane of existence? If it's completely and utterly empty, like, it's probably going to be eternal, I would say. I don't see a reason why it wouldn't be eternal. So at that point, time is just kind of a useless concept. Like, you may have it, but what does it do? It does nothing. It's worthless. It's a worthless existence. It means absolutely nothing at that point. Perhaps we removed time when we destroyed all of life, when we removed life from the universe. That's my theory. That's my theory. Perhaps we removed time when we removed all matter from the universe. If you're like a panpsychist, that would make some sense, right? To think that way. But if you are hard set on the relativity of, well, you go and orbit a black hole, time is going to be different. I have something for that too. But those sorts of people would probably say maybe, well, once you removed all matter and energy from the universe, that's when you remove time. Perhaps that's what they would say. I may be strawmanning on accident, but I'm trying to steelman every single case as best as I can. So, bear with me. But the thing is that like, even if you're right, and space and time are one and the same fabric, and time exists within space-time no matter what. I would like to ask, where did that concept come from? Because I mean, let's look at all the different kinds of time frames that we as humans have come up with. We have a year. What's a year? Well, it's an orbital period around the sun, right? It's not the same for every planet. But what is a year here on Earth? It's 365 days. Well, what's a day? A day is a rotational period of the planet. It's not the same on every planet. But what is it here on Earth? Well, it's 24 hours. Well, what's an hour? 60 minutes. Well, what's a minute? 60 seconds. Well, what's a second? Because it seems like all of our time measurements are completely based off the second. And apparently, I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head. I Googled it. It's a little bit more complicated than I figured out. There's like, it has something to do with the radioactivity of a certain atom, which is exactly why the atomic clocks are the most accurate clocks, because they're actually based off of these atoms, right? That's what they're measuring, right? And it's I've I've heard them called like oscillations, but it also just sounds like it's radioactive energy jumps or something like that. And I've watched a lot of physics content made for the public, which they dumb a lot of stuff down for the public. But they've explained it on those programs as some sort of movement, some sort of up and down oscillation for the atom. Whatever it is, it involves movement, right? There has to be some sort of energy level jump, and I believe that's like an electron moving from one level to another level. This is where me not being an expert really starts to show and give fault. But it really sounds to me like the whole idea behind the second relies on movement. And the way I've heard it before is that it's an oscillation, right? And that's why when you move through space, time starts changing. Because then you go a further distance in the same amount of time, because that oscillation is still considered a second, even though now that you're moving, you travel a farther distance in that oscillation in the same amount of time. But I digress. It really just sounds to me like the whole definition of a second is based off of A, the movement of matter, or B, the measurement of energy. Which, I mean, movement of matter is energy, whatever. Matter, energy, E equals mc squared. They're equal. Doesn't matter to me. Call it energy, call it matter. I don't care. Irrelevant. But that's what it's based off of. So at that point, it would be removal of energy and matter. That would be what removes time. So in my head, time still doesn't exist. Energy and matter exist. Time does not. Time is defined based off of certain things we find in nature. It's a duration. That it's like a pound. Like, does a pound exist? That's kind of a weird question, because it's like, sure, I can measure out a pound of something, but you know, I mean, it's a measurement. What do you mean, does a pound exist? Does an inch exist? Does does a watt exist? This is starting to get to a point where I start to get philosophical in a mathematical sense, and I start thinking about, do whole numbers even exist? Does 1 pound even exist? No matter how closely you try to measure out 1 pound, it's never going to be exactly 1 pound, right? No matter how much you try to measure out exactly 1 second, who's to say that it is exactly 1 second? Like, atomic clocks are the most accurate kinds of clocks, but the thing is that the second is just defined off of this set of criteria that we know is relatively set in stone, but that doesn't necessarily mean that time exists. It just means that this set of criteria exists, and we call how long that takes, we call that set of criteria a second. Like, it's still conceptual. It's kind of weird when you start getting into this, because now it sounds like I'm trying to split hairs. And to a certain degree, I am. It's kind of like saying the moon doesn't exist, but the matter that makes up the moon does exist. Right? It's kind of like that. But, I mean, the moon wasn't always the moon as we know it now. The moon used to have more rocks on it, and then we took some back here to Earth. So, do we actually have 100% of the moon right now, or do we have like 99.9999998% of the moon? Like, does a full moon, does a 100% moon exist? Maybe not. Maybe we only have a large fraction of the moon, you know? Which is stupid to say. But at the same time, it really does down to the point of, what is the moon but the sum of its parts? What is the moon but matter? If we're going to say that time exists, then it can't necessarily be emergent from another thing's existence, right? Like, we could argue, I'm trying to make another thing. It gets kind of weird because you're splitting hairs to a certain degree. But to a certain degree, I really do think that it's it makes sense. Like, it's warranted when you're talking about time. When you're talking about, does the future exist? Does the past exist? I mean, the way I look at it is, the universe could be eternal. I mean, I like to think that the universe is eternal, personally. Um, from a scientific perspective, I mean, we could have had the Big Bang, but I mean, the Big Bang doesn't necessarily mean that the universe didn't exist before the Big Bang. The universe was still there, it just expanded very rapidly, right? Like, that's the way I interpret it. And then there's the idea of the big crunch, and that's supposed to be the end of the universe. There could be the heat death to the universe, but that doesn't mean that the universe stops existing. Like, yeah, it might die, it might crunch, but it's still there. It's not gone. I don't really see scientifically, especially if the law that energy and matter cannot be created nor destroyed. I don't know if there's been any real kickback on that. There is black holes. Black holes get confusing, and there's certain things that people try to do to remedy the way black holes exist. Like, Hawking radiation is supposed to make up for where all the matter goes. I mean, whatever. Or, yeah. If it's true that nothing can ever be created nor destroyed, then obviously the universe should be eternal. If the universe is eternal, then let's say that it does end up dying at some point. Let's say that at some point, or that it had a beginning, that the Big Bang happened. At some point in the universe's uh, existence, eternal existence, there was probably a point where life never existed, right? So if you're going to say that time exists and it doesn't depend on life, right? Then time would have to exist even when life doesn't. Okay? So in this time frame where there's no life, then you're saying that time exists. But to the universe, like there's nothing to perceive it unless you're maybe a panpsychist and you believe that consciousness is throughout the universe in some way, shape, or form. Unless you believe that, unless you're a panpsychist, the universe is dead and witnesses nothing of itself unless there's life. And without life, there's no way to perceive it. The whole idea of time becomes irrelevant because now the universe is just the same stuff that exists forever. And I mean, maybe you can turn matter into energy, right? But I don't know. In my head, that doesn't really matter either. Like, it's a change, but just because you turn matter into energy, that doesn't mean that you've destroyed matter, right? So that's kind of where my whole thinking lies. Is that there's just too many things that don't necessarily make sense. There's also the whole definition of matter. I remember learning when I was a little kid in science class in elementary school, I was told that matter is defined as anything that takes up space. Space, not space time. If we were to somehow remove an object from the universe, would we have more time? Because space and time are the same fabric. So not only would we have more space, but we would also have more time in the universe. I don't understand how that makes sense. What does that even mean to have more time in the universe? It doesn't even make sense. The whole idea that space and time are the same fabric, to me, more or less, is just the conceptual way of understanding that time arises from space. It doesn't have its own existence. And beyond that, time doesn't necessarily arise from space, at least not in any useful way. It more or less just arises from the distortion of space. Because if space was equally distributed throughout the whole universe, there would be no differences in time at all. So once that space gets distorted, then there's time differences. But then I would go a step further and say it's still worthless because there's nothing there to witness it. So until there's life in the universe, there really is no time. The time just doesn't exist. Even if it does exist, it's a worthless existence and means nothing. And you might as well just remove it from the universe and nothing would change. So that's just kind of my thought on it all. But yeah, I am on. This video is getting way too long. I've been going on for like 40 minutes now, so I need to end it. I need to be getting to bed. I'm more tired than what 40 minutes would make it seem like, but I'm on camp. Time doesn't exist. Uh, Let me know if you're on the side that time does exist, because I think it's just an illusion created by living things, and probably not even all living things, just most. advanced living things. But let me know down in the comments if you believe that time does exist and why you think time exists, and try to, I don't know, I would be interested in anyone who believes that time exists in its own, by its own merit, through like it exists independently from anything else. um but yeah, I would be interested in seeing what you guys have to think. Most people I talk to, whenever I bring up this topic, they're on my side and I'm preaching to the choir. And there's really not much to convince them of. Like people broadly kind of understand that time is an illusion. They don't necessarily approach it through the same processes that I do, but regardless, uh, thank you for watching. Hope you have a good one. Hope you continue having good ones. And I hope to catch you in the next one. I have no idea when that will be. It will happen when it happens. And we like that. It'll happen when it happens. But until that next video ends up happening and gets uploaded, I'm going to have to catch you later. Take care.